Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the mining scanner on his shoulder. The rocky terrain of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly before him, its red soil cracking under the twin suns overhead. This planet was supposed to be a gold mine of rare minerals, but 3 months of surveying had yielded nothing but disappointment and debt. His company, Terra Mining Solutions, had invested everything in this expedition. If Marcus didn't find something valuable soon, they'd all be heading home broke. The thought made his stomach churn as he navigated around a cluster of jagged rocks that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. The scanner in his hand beeped softly, indicating trace amounts of lithium nearby. Not enough to pay for fuel home, but something. Marcus sighed and followed the signal toward a series of caves carved into the mountainside. The openings looked natural, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. As he approached the largest cave entrance, a sound made him freeze. It wasn't the wind or settling rocks. It was something else entirely. A soft, almost musical whimpering that seemed to echo from deep within the cavern. Marcus had explored dozens of caves on this planet, but he'd never heard anything like this. The company briefings had assured them that Kepler 442b had no intelligent life, just some basic plant forms and a few small creatures similar to Earth lizards. But this sound was different. It was sad. Against his better judgment, Marcus activated his helmet's light system and stepped into the cave. The walls were smooth and curved, almost like they'd been carved by something intelligent. Strange symbols covered some sections, too faded to make out clearly. His boots echoed against the stone floor as he moved deeper into the darkness. The whimpering grew louder as he descended. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. Protocol demanded he report any signs of intelligent life immediately, but something held him back. The sound was so pitiful, so desperate. If there was something hurt down here, he needed to help first and ask questions later. The cave opened into a vast chamber, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows above. But it wasn't the size that shocked him. It was what lay scattered across the floor. Bones. Massive bones that could have belonged to some prehistoric creature from Earth's distant past. And in the center of the chamber, partially buried under a collapsed section of ceiling, lay what could only be described as a dragon. Marcus had read about similar creatures in the company's xenobiology reports. Dragons were theoretically possible on worlds with specific atmospheric conditions, but none had ever been confirmed. Yet here, one lay easily 40 feet long with scales that shimmered even in death. Its wings were folded against its sides, and its great head rested on the stone floor with empty eye sockets staring at nothing. But the whimpering wasn't coming from the dead dragon. It was coming from beneath it. Marcus approached carefully, his scanner detecting elevated heat signatures near the creature's body. As he got closer, he could see movement, small shapes shifting in the shadows cast by the massive corpse. 2 tiny dragons, no bigger than house cats, were trapped beneath their mother's protective wing. They were weak, clearly malnourished, but alive. Their scales were a deep emerald green, and their eyes, those eyes were intelligent in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten. The larger of the 2 hatchlings looked up at Marcus and made a sound that was half growl, half plea. It was trying to protect its sibling while clearly desperate for help. The smaller one barely moved, its breathing shallow and labored. Marcus knelt down slowly, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I'm not going to hurt you." The larger hatchling tilted its head, studying Marcus with remarkable intelligence. Dragons were supposed to be mindless beasts, according to most xenobiological theories, but these creatures were clearly thinking, evaluating, deciding whether to trust this strange alien who had wandered into their world. Marcus reached into his supply pack and pulled out an emergency ration bar. He'd been saving it for later, but these little ones needed food more than he did. He broke off a small piece and held it out toward the larger hatchling. The creature sniffed the offering carefully, then looked back at Marcus. After a moment that felt like an eternity, it gently took the food from his fingers. Its touch was surprisingly warm, and its small claws were careful not to scratch his gloves. The larger hatchling immediately broke the piece in half and offered part to its sibling. The smaller one managed to lift its head enough to eat, and Marcus felt something tighten in his chest at the display of sibling devotion. "Your mother. She was protecting you when the ceiling came down, wasn't she?" Marcus said softly, looking at the collapsed stone above. The dragon had used her body to shield her babies from the falling rocks, sacrificing herself to keep them alive. He spent the next several minutes carefully feeding the hatchlings small pieces of his ration bars. As they ate, they grew more alert, more trusting. The larger one even allowed Marcus to gently stroke its head, purring softly at the touch. But Marcus knew they couldn't stay here. The cave was unstable, and these creatures needed proper care. More importantly, he was supposed to report back to base camp in 6 hours. If he didn't check in, they'd send a search team, and then everyone would know about the dragons. The company's policies were clear about discovering intelligent life. First contact protocols demanded immediate containment and study. These babies would end up in labs, poked and prodded by scientists who saw them as specimens rather than living beings. Marcus couldn't let that happen. He looked around the chamber and spotted something that made his heart race. Near the dragon's head, partially hidden under debris, was a clutch of 3 eggs. 2 were clearly broken and empty. These were where his little friends had come from. But the 3rd egg was intact, though its surface was cracked in several places. Marcus approached the egg carefully and pressed his ear against its warm surface. He could hear movement inside and a tiny heartbeat. This little one was still alive, but wouldn't be for much longer without proper incubation. Decision made, Marcus began working. He pulled emergency heating units from his pack and arranged them around the egg, creating a makeshift incubator. Then he gently gathered the 2 hatchlings, who seemed to understand that he was trying to help. They allowed him to place them in his modified collection containers, which he lined with his spare clothing for warmth and comfort. The larger hatchling, Marcus decided to call him Ember, chirped softly as if asking a question. Marcus looked down at the intelligent green eyes and made a promise. "I'm going to take care of you," he said firmly. "All of you. But this has to be our secret, okay? There are people who wouldn't understand." As if the little dragon comprehended his words, Ember nodded slightly and settled down in the container with his sibling. Marcus worked quickly to set up a portable camp in the chamber. He sent a message back to base indicating he'd found some interesting mineral deposits and would be extending his survey by a few days. It was a lie, but it bought him time to figure out what to do next. Over the next 2 days, Marcus watched the hatchlings grow stronger under his care. The smaller one, he called her Spark, began moving around more and even attempted a few shaky flights around the chamber. They both showed remarkable intelligence, learning quickly which sounds meant food, sleep, or playtime. But the real miracle happened on the 3rd day. Marcus was checking his makeshift egg incubator when he heard a small crack. The 3rd egg was hatching. He watched in amazement as a tiny snout pushed through the shell, followed by the most beautiful golden scales he'd ever seen. This hatchling was different from the others. Smaller, more delicate, with scales that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. The golden hatchling, Blaze, Marcus decided, looked up at him with the same intelligent eyes as his siblings and made a tiny chirping sound that seemed to say, "Hello." In that moment, Marcus felt something shift in his heart. These weren't just alien creatures he was helping. They were his responsibility now, his family. Marcus spent the rest of that day teaching all 3 hatchlings to recognize their names and respond to simple commands. Their learning speed was incredible. Within hours, they understood come, stay, and quiet. They also learned that the strange tall creature who fed them and kept them warm was someone to be trusted completely. But Marcus knew their time in the cave was running out. His extended survey time was almost up, and base camp would expect him back soon. He needed a plan to get his new family off planet without anyone discovering them. That night, as the 3 baby dragons slept curled up against his sleeping bag for warmth, Marcus made his decision. He would tell his team that the mineral surveys had been unsuccessful and recommend abandoning the operation. With the company facing bankruptcy anyway, they'd probably agree to cut their losses. But first, he had to find a way to get 3 baby dragons past company security and onto his personal transport ship. It would be the biggest risk he'd ever taken, but as he looked down at Ember, Spark, and Blaze sleeping peacefully beside him, Marcus knew it was worth it. These little ones had already lost their mother. They weren't going to lose their new father, too. Marcus reached out and gently stroked Ember's head, earning a sleepy purr in response. "Don't worry, kids," he whispered into the darkness. "Daddy's going to figure this out." Outside the cave, the twin suns of Kepler 442b were setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, a human and 3 baby dragons shared the ancient bond that connected all families across the galaxy: love, protection, and the promise of a future together. Marcus fell asleep that night with 3 warm, trusting creatures pressed against his side, their soft purring filling the cave with the sound of hope. He didn't know what dangers lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to keep his new family safe. The adventure was just beginning. Marcus woke to the sound of soft chirping and the feeling of something warm and scaly pressed against his neck. He opened his eyes to find Blaze, the golden hatchling, perched on his shoulder like a cat seeking attention. The little dragon's scales caught the morning light filtering through the cave entrance, creating tiny rainbows on the cave walls. "Good morning to you too, little one," Marcus whispered, gently scratching under Blaze's chin. The hatchling purred and nuzzled closer, clearly having decided that Marcus was the most important thing in his small world. Ember and Spark were already awake, playing what looked like a game of chase around the cave chamber. They moved with increasing confidence each day, their wings growing stronger and their coordination improving. Marcus marveled at how quickly they were developing. According to his tablet's xenobiology database, most reptilian species took months to reach this level of mobility. But dragons, it seemed, were exceptional in every way. Marcus checked his communicator and felt his stomach drop. He had 17 missed messages from base camp, each one more urgent than the last. The final message was from Director Chen herself, demanding his immediate return for debriefing. "Looks like our vacation is over, kids," Marcus said to the 3 hatchlings, who had gathered around his feet as he prepared breakfast. They'd learned his routines quickly and knew that morning meant food time. As he distributed small portions of processed protein paste among his 3 companions, Marcus's mind raced through possible plans. His personal transport ship was parked at the mining base, about 50 kilometers from the cave. Getting there unseen would be challenging enough, but smuggling 3 baby dragons aboard would be nearly impossible. The company used bioscanners at every checkpoint, designed to detect any unauthorized life forms. The scanners were primarily meant to prevent contamination from dangerous microorganisms, but they would easily pick up something as large as dragon hatchlings. Unless... Marcus pulled up the ship's manifest on his tablet and scrolled through the equipment list. Every mining operation carried emergency livestock in case of extended missions, usually chickens or rabbits that could provide fresh protein if supply lines were cut. His ship had a sealed biocontainment unit designed to house such animals during transport. The unit had its own life support system and was shielded from most scanning equipment to prevent stress to the animals inside. If he could modify the biosignatures in the system's computer, he might be able to hide the dragon's true nature. It was risky, but it was the only plan he had. Marcus spent the next hour carefully packing his equipment while explaining the situation to his three companions. They listened intently, their intelligent eyes following his every movement. Sometimes Marcus forgot they were supposed to be non-sentient creatures. Their awareness and understanding seemed to grow stronger each day. "We're going to take a trip," he told them as he prepared the modified carrying containers that would transport them. "But you'll need to be very quiet and very brave. Can you do that for Daddy?" Ember chittered softly and rubbed against Marcus's leg in what was clearly meant to be reassurance. Spark copied her brother's gesture, while Blaze simply climbed up Marcus's arm to perch on his shoulder again, apparently having decided this was his permanent spot. The journey to base camp took most of the day. Marcus traveled on foot, taking indirect routes to avoid the main survey paths. His three passengers remained remarkably quiet during the trek, seeming to understand the need for stealth. As they approached the mining facility, Marcus could see increased activity around the landing pad. Several transport ships that hadn't been there before were now parked alongside the regular fleet. Corporate inspection teams, most likely. The kind of people who asked uncomfortable questions about delayed reports and extended survey times. Marcus waited until evening shift change to make his move. Under cover of darkness, he approached his personal transport through the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the facility. The ship was exactly where he'd left it, but the biocontainment unit would need some quick modifications. Working by the light of his helmet lamp, Marcus accessed the unit's computer system and began altering the biological signatures in its database. Dragon DNA was similar enough to certain Earth reptiles that he could mask the readings, making them appear to be rare but harmless lizard specimens he'd collected for the company's xenobiology division. As he worked, the three hatchlings explored their new surroundings with quiet curiosity. They seemed to understand that they were in a dangerous place and kept their voices down to soft whispers that sounded almost like conversation among themselves. "Almost done," Marcus murmured, as he uploaded the final modifications to the bioscanner's recognition software. "Just need to calibrate the—" Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the ship. Marcus froze, his blood turning to ice. The steps were getting closer and he could hear voices. Director Chen and someone else he didn't recognize. "Still haven't reported back from his extended survey," Chen was saying. "It's been 4 days past his scheduled return. Either something's happened to him, or he's found something he doesn't want to share." "My experience suggests the latter," replied an unfamiliar voice with a clipped corporate accent. "Freelance miners have been known to hide valuable discoveries until they can file independent claims." Marcus's heart pounded as he quickly gathered his three companions. There was nowhere to hide on the ship, and the biocontainment unit wasn't ready yet. If they were caught now, everything would be over. Ember seemed to sense the danger. The little dragon looked up at Marcus with questioning eyes, then glanced toward the air vent near the ceiling. The opening was large enough for the hatchlings to hide in, but Marcus couldn't fit. "Smart boy," Marcus whispered, lifting Ember toward the vent. "Take your brother and sister and hide in there. Don't come out until I call for you, okay?" Ember nodded, an action that still amazed Marcus, and climbed into the ventilation shaft. Spark and Blaze followed without hesitation, their trust in both Marcus and their eldest sibling absolute. Marcus barely had time to close the vent grate before the ship's airlock cycled open. Director Chen stepped aboard, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit that screamed corporate headquarters. "Marcus!" Chen's relief seemed genuine, though her eyes were sharp as she looked him over. "We were beginning to worry. Your last report mentioned mineral deposits, but you've been radio silent for days." "Sorry, Director," Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. The deposits turned out to be more extensive than I initially thought. I wanted to complete a full survey before filing my report. The corporate man, his badge read Senior Inspector Williams, stepped forward with a scanner in his hand. Standard procedure requires biological screening after any extended surface mission, he said coldly. We need to ensure you haven't picked up any contamination. Marcus submitted to the scan, knowing it would show nothing unusual, but his eyes kept drifting to the vent where 3 baby dragons were hiding, trusting him to keep them safe. Clean, Williams announced after studying his scanner's readouts. What about biological specimens? Our records show you have authorization to collect samples for the Xenobiology Division. Nothing worth collecting on this survey, Marcus lied smoothly. Mostly just the usual microorganisms and a few plant samples. The planet's biosphere is pretty limited. Chen nodded, making notes on her tablet. Disappointing, but not unexpected. What about the mineral deposits you mentioned? Marcus pulled up the fake geological data he'd prepared during the hike back. Trace lithium and some rare earth elements, but not in quantities that would justify extraction costs. I recommend we cut our losses and move on to the next survey site. Williams frowned at this assessment. The company has invested significant resources in this operation. Are you certain there's nothing here worth pursuing? Absolutely certain, Marcus replied. This planet is a dead end. From somewhere in the ship's ventilation system came a soft sound, barely audible, like a small animal shifting position. Marcus coughed loudly to cover it, but Williams's head turned toward the sound. Rats, Marcus said quickly. The ship's been sitting here for months. Small vermin sometimes get into the ventilation systems. I'll have maintenance deal with it when we get back to port. Williams seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Chen was studying Marcus with a thoughtful expression. She'd worked with him for 3 years and knew him well enough to sense when something was off. Well then, she said finally, I suppose we should begin shutdown procedures for the operation. Williams, would you mind starting the inspection of the other ships? I'd like to have a word with Marcus about his final report. The inspector nodded and left, but not before giving the ship one more suspicious look. As soon as he was gone, Chen turned to Marcus with raised eyebrows. Okay, what's really going on? She asked. I've known you too long. Marcus, you're hiding something. Marcus felt torn between loyalty to his boss and protectiveness toward his new family. Chen had always been fair with him, even going to bat for him when corporate questioned his unconventional methods. But she was also a company woman through and through. Some things are bigger than mining contracts, he said carefully. Some discoveries change everything. Chen's eyes widened slightly. Marcus, if you've found something significant and you're thinking of hiding it from the company, that's theft of corporate assets. I can't protect you from that. What if what I found doesn't belong to any corporation? Marcus asked. What if it's something that deserves to live free, without being turned into a lab specimen? Understanding dawned in Chen's expression. You found intelligent life, didn't you? Marcus didn't answer directly, but his silence was confirmation enough. Chen ran a hand through her hair, clearly struggling with the implications. Marcus, you know I have to report this. First contact protocols are very specific about... A soft, chirping sound came from the ventilation system, followed by what sounded distinctly like a baby crying. Both humans froze as the sound continued, joined by 2 more small voices trying to offer comfort. Chen stared at the vent, then at Marcus. Are those... Please, Marcus said quietly. They're just babies. They've already lost their mother. If corporate gets hold of them, they'll spend their lives in cages. The crying from the vent grew more distressed, and Marcus couldn't stand it anymore. He opened the grate and called softly, It's okay, kids. Come on out! 3 small dragon heads appeared in the opening, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Ember was the first to emerge, followed by Spark and Blaze. They immediately ran to Marcus, clustering around his feet and looking up at him with complete trust. Chen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Marcus! They're beautiful!" The three hatchlings studied the new human carefully. Ember took a cautious step forward and tilted his head, clearly trying to determine if this stranger was a threat. When Chen slowly knelt down and held out her hand, the little dragon sniffed cautiously before allowing her to touch his head. "They're so intelligent," Chen breathed as Spark and Blaze approached for their own introductions. "Look at their eyes. They're thinking, evaluating. These aren't just animals." "That's what I tried to tell you," Marcus said. "They understand language. They problem solve. They show empathy for each other. They're people, Chen. Just not human people." Chen spent several minutes interacting with the hatchlings, marveling at their responsiveness and obvious intelligence. Marcus could see her internal struggle playing out across her face, duty to the company versus what was clearly the right thing to do. Finally, she stood up and looked Marcus in the eye. "How long do you need?" "What?" "To get them somewhere safe. How long do you need?" Marcus felt a wave of relief so strong his knees nearly buckled. 12 hours, maybe 8 if I push the engines." Chen nodded firmly. "Inspector Williams is staying overnight to finish his assessment. I can delay his access to your ship until tomorrow afternoon, but after that, I won't be able to help you." "Thank you," Marcus said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "Don't thank me yet," Chen replied grimly. "If corporate finds out I helped you, my career is over. But some things are more important than careers." She looked down at the 3 baby dragons, who were now playing gently around her feet. "These little ones deserve better than a life in laboratory cages." As Chen left to create a distraction for Inspector Williams, Marcus quickly finished preparing the bio-containment unit. The 3 hatchlings seemed to understand that they were going on another journey, and they climbed into their travel containers without protest. Marcus fired up the ship's engines and began the pre-flight sequence, his hands shaking slightly from nervous energy. In a few hours, they would be free of Kepler 442b and heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future. As the ship lifted off from the landing pad, Marcus looked down at the mining facility one last time. He was leaving behind his career, his steady income, and any chance of a normal life. But as Blaze chirped softly from his perch on Marcus's shoulder and Ember and Spark settled down for the journey ahead, he knew he'd made the right choice. Family wasn't always about blood or species. Sometimes it was about love, protection, and the promise to always be there for each other. And as their ship accelerated toward the stars, Marcus Martinez and his 3 dragon children began their new life together among the infinite possibilities of the galaxy. 6 months after leaving Kepler 442b, Marcus Martinez stood on the observation deck of New Haven Station, watching 3 magnificent young dragons soar through the artificial atmosphere of the station's recreation dome. What had once been tiny hatchlings no bigger than house cats were now sleek, powerful creatures the size of large dogs, their scales gleaming in the simulated sunlight. Ember, now the undisputed leader of his siblings, performed a graceful barrel roll before landing on the platform beside Marcus. His emerald scales had developed intricate patterns of silver along the edges, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone far older than his months of life would suggest. "Show off," Marcus said with a grin, scratching behind Ember's head ridge where he liked it best. The young dragon rumbled with contentment and pressed closer to his human father. Spark landed moments later, her technique more precise but less flashy than her brother's. She'd always been the careful one, thinking through each move before acting. Her emerald scales were darker than Ember's, with traces of deep blue that caught the light when she moved. Blaze was the last to land, his golden scales now shot through with veins of brilliant orange that seemed to glow with their own internal fire. He was still the smallest of the 3, but what he lacked in size he made up for in speed and agility. He chirped happily and immediately claimed his favorite spot perched on Marcus's shoulder. "How are they adapting?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Director Chen from the mining operation, as she approached with her ever-present data tablet. Dr. Chen was a xenobiologist who ran the research station on New Haven, and she'd become both a valuable ally and close friend over the past months. "Better than I could have hoped," Marcus replied, watching as Ember and Spark began a playful wrestling match on the platform. Their language comprehension is now equivalent to a human 10-year-old, and their problem-solving abilities are off the charts. Yesterday, Blaze figured out how to rewire the food dispenser in their quarters to give double portions. Dr. Chen laughed. "Clever boy. Have you given any more thought to my offer?" The offer. Dr. Chen had been after Marcus for weeks to officially document his dragon's development and intelligence for the scientific community. She believed their story could revolutionize humanity's understanding of interspecies communication and dragon cognition. But Marcus remained hesitant. "I don't want them turned into research subjects," Marcus said firmly. "They're my family, not specimens." "I understand your concerns," Dr. Chen replied. "But consider this. Right now, dragons are classified as non-sentient creatures under galactic law. That means they have no legal protections. But if we can prove their intelligence officially, they could be granted personhood status, full legal rights, protection under galactic law, the works." Marcus looked down at Blaze, who was listening intently to their conversation. The little dragon's understanding of human speech had grown exponentially over the months, and Marcus was certain he grasped far more than he let on. "What do you think, buddy?" Marcus asked. "Want to be famous?" Blaze made a series of chirps and clicks that Marcus had learned to interpret. The young dragon was expressing concern about being separated from Marcus, fear of strangers, but also curiosity about what it might mean for other dragons like their mother. "He says he'll think about it," Marcus translated, causing Dr. Chen to raise an eyebrow. "You can understand their language?" "We've developed our own communication system," Marcus explained. "It's part dragon body language, part vocalizations, and part human words they've learned to mimic. Ember can actually say about 50 human words now, though he prefers dragon speech most of the time." As if summoned by his name, Ember looked up from his play fight with Spark and approached the two humans. He studied Dr. Chen for a moment, then looked at Marcus. "Trust?" Ember asked in his deep, slightly raspy dragon voice. It was one of his favorite human words and his way of asking Marcus's opinion about people. "Yes," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Dr. Chen is good people. She wants to help dragons like you." Ember nodded solemnly and walked over to Dr. Chen. To her amazement, he extended one wing in what Marcus recognized as a formal dragon greeting, something the young dragons had taught themselves based on observed behavior in old Earth documentaries about bird species. "Greetings, Dr. Chen," Ember said carefully in English, his pronunciation improving daily. "Marcus says you are friend." Dr. Chen nearly dropped her tablet. He can speak human languages?" "Getting better every day," Marcus said proudly. "Spark prefers to stick to dragon speech, but she understands everything we say." And Blaze. He looked at the golden dragon on his shoulder. "Well, Blaze is working on something special. Aren't you, little guy?" Blaze made a sound that was distinctly like laughter and began to hum. But it wasn't just any humming. It was the melody to an old Earth song that Marcus had been playing in their quarters. As they listened, Blaze began adding words. "My bonny lie over ocean," the little dragon sang in a sweet high voice that sent shivers down Dr. Chen's spine. "My bonny lies over sea." The xenobiologist stared in wonder as Blaze continued the song, his pronunciation clear and his understanding of the melody perfect. When he finished, all three adult dragons applauded by clicking their claws together in appreciation. "This changes everything," Dr. Chen whispered. "Marcus, they're not just intelligent. They're artists. They have culture, language, music. The Galactic Council has to recognize them as a sentient species." Marcus felt a familiar protective surge rise in his chest. And then what? They become political pawns in some galactic rights movement? They get studied and poked and prodded by every scientist in the galaxy who wants to understand how they think? "Dad, no," Spark said suddenly in dragon speech, speaking for the first time that day. Marcus had taught all three children to call him Dad in both languages, and hearing it never failed to make his heart swell with pride. "What is it, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, switching to the dragon, clicking and chirping language they'd developed together. Spark's response was complex, involving several concepts that didn't translate directly to human speech. But the gist was clear. She wanted to help other dragons who might still be out there, alone and afraid like they had been. She was willing to be studied and documented if it meant protecting others of her kind. Ember immediately agreed, adding his own thoughts about the responsibility that came with their unique situation. They were probably the only dragons in the galaxy who had been raised by humans, who understood both worlds. That gave them a chance to be bridges between the species. Blaze, still perched on Marcus's shoulder, nuzzled against his cheek and whispered in his ear. His message was simpler but just as profound. "Trust Dad. Dad choose right." Marcus felt emotion tighten his throat. 6 months ago, these had been helpless babies depending on him for everything. Now they were thoughtful, caring individuals making their own decisions about their futures. He was proud and terrified in equal measure. "Okay," Marcus said finally, looking at Dr. Chen. "We'll do it. But I have conditions." Over the next several weeks, New Haven Station became the center of a scientific revolution. Researchers from across the galaxy arrived to observe and interact with the three young dragons, but always under Marcus's watchful supervision and with strict protocols in place to protect their emotional well-being. The dragons themselves approached the attention with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Ember, natural leader that he was, seemed to enjoy demonstrating their capabilities and teaching humans about dragon culture and communication. He was particularly proud when he learned to write in both human script and the ancient dragon symbols they'd discovered in their birth cave. Spark preferred working with smaller groups, patiently explaining dragon social structures and family bonds through detailed drawings and careful translations. She had an artistic talent that manifested in beautiful carvings she created using her claws and breath-based heating abilities. Blaze became the station's unofficial entertainer, learning dozens of human songs and dragon lullabies that he would perform during evening gatherings. His ability to seamlessly blend human and dragon musical traditions fascinated the cultural anthropologists who came to study him. But it was during one of these research sessions that Marcus realized how much his children had grown. A linguist from the Centauri Academy was testing Ember's vocabulary when the dragon suddenly stopped mid-sentence. "What is it?" the researcher asked. Ember tilted his head, listening to something the humans couldn't hear. Then his eyes went wide with alarm. "Ship's coming," he said urgently in English. "Bad ships. Smell wrong." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The dragon's sensory abilities far exceeded human capabilities, and they'd learned to distinguish between the scents and sounds of different types of spacecraft. If Ember said the approaching ships were wrong, Marcus believed him. The station's alert system activated moments later, confirming what Ember had already detected. 3 unmarked vessels were approaching at high speed, ignoring all communication attempts and broadcasting no identification codes. "Corporate raiders," Dr. Chen said grimly as she studied the sensor readings. "Probably here for the dragons. Word must have leaked out despite our security measures." Marcus's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. "Get all non-essential personnel to the evacuation pods," he ordered, his voice taking on the authority he'd developed during his mining days. "Sarah, start the emergency data transfer to the backup sites. If they want to steal the research, they'll have to work for it." But even as the humans rushed to implement security protocols, the three dragons had already sprung into action. Ember was herding the research staff toward the emergency exits, while Spark used her precise fire breath to begin destroying sensitive equipment that couldn't be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Blaze had disappeared entirely. But Marcus could hear him somewhere in the station's infrastructure, and he trusted his smallest son had a plan. The raiders breached the station's docking bay with military precision, but they hadn't counted on facing three intelligent dragons who considered New Haven Station their home and its inhabitants their extended family. Ember met the first wave of raiders in the main corridor, his impressive size and show of fangs causing several of them to hesitate. When their leader raised a stunner weapon, Ember spoke in perfect English. "You will not harm my family," he said, his voice carrying all the authority of a dragon 10 times his age. "Leave now, and we will not pursue." The raider leader laughed. "Smart animal, but still just an animal. Take them down." It was the last mistake he made. Ember's response was swift and decisive, his fire breath carefully controlled to disable weapons without seriously injuring their attackers. These were corporate raiders, not soldiers, and they fled in panic when faced with a dragon who could think, plan, and communicate. Spark appeared from another corridor, having successfully destroyed all the research data they couldn't afford to lose. Her timing was perfect as she helped Ember corral the remaining raiders toward the docking bay. But it was Blaze who provided the most surprising assistance. Marcus heard his golden son's voice echoing through the station's communication system, speaking in rapid-fire dragon speech that was being broadcast on all frequencies. Within minutes, Marcus understood what was happening. Blaze was calling for help in the ancient dragon language, sending out a distress call that reached far beyond New Haven Station. And impossibly, something was answering. The raiders' ships exploded in brilliant displays of controlled fire as three massive forms emerged from hyperspace. Adult dragons, each one easily the size of a small ship, their scales gleaming in the starlight. They moved with the grace and power of creatures born to rule the skies, and their eyes burned with intelligence that had survived since the dawn of civilization. Marcus watched in amazement as the adult dragons surrounded the raider ships, not attacking, but making their presence known. The corporate criminals took one look at creatures that could swallow their vessels whole and decided discretion was the better part of valor. As the raiders fled into hyperspace, the adult dragons approached New Haven Station. The largest of them, an ancient female with scales like polished obsidian, spoke in the dragon tongue that Marcus was still learning to understand. But Ember, Spark, and Blaze responded fluently, and Marcus felt his heart swell with pride as he realized his children were conducting formal diplomatic negotiations with their own species. They were explaining their situation, their choice to work with humans, and their desire to serve as ambassadors between the two peoples. The ancient dragon listened carefully, then turned her great head toward the station's observation deck, where Marcus stood watching. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Human Marcus Martinez," she said in accented but clear English. "You have raised our children well. The dragon clans have voted. We name you Dragon Friend, the first human to be granted this honor. Your children have chosen to be bridges between our peoples, and we support their choice." Over the following days, New Haven Station became the site of the first formal diplomatic contact between humans and dragons. The three young dragons served as translators and cultural interpreters, helping both species understand each other's needs and customs. Marcus watched with pride as his children took on roles he'd never imagined for them. Ember became an official ambassador, his natural leadership abilities making him perfect for formal negotiations. Spark focused on educational exchange, teaching both human and dragon children about the other species. And Blaze, with his musical talents, became a cultural bridge, creating art that spoke to both human and dragon hearts. But despite their important new roles, the three young dragons never forgot who had saved them from that cave and raised them with love and patience. Every evening they returned to Marcus's quarters, where they would curl up around their human father and share the events of their day. "Thank you, Dad," Ember said one night as they settled down for sleep. His English was now flawless, but he still preferred to use simple words that carried the most meaning. "For what?" Marcus asked, though he had an idea. "For choosing family over fear," Spark answered, her voice soft in the darkness. "For seeing people instead of animals." Blaze, nestled against Marcus's side as always, began to hum a lullaby that blended human melodies with dragon harmonies. As the music filled their quarters, Marcus felt a contentment he'd never known before his three children entered his life. Outside their window, the stars sparkled with infinite possibilities. The galaxy was full of wonders and dangers, but Marcus knew that whatever came next, they would face it together as a family. The human who had risked everything to save three helpless dragon babies had gained something more valuable than all the rare minerals in the galaxy. He had gained children who loved him unconditionally, a purpose that gave his life meaning, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest choice, to care for someone who needs help. As the three dragons settled into sleep around their human father, the station's lights dimmed to simulate nightfall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, Marcus Martinez was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by his family, protected by their love, and proud of the people they had all chosen to become. In the vast emptiness of space, a small miracle continued to grow. The bond between a lonely human miner and three dragon children who had found in each other everything they needed to build a better future for both their species. It was a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of family, and the endless capacity of love to transcend the boundaries between worlds.